For years now, I've relied on two chainsaws to do all my tree work. I've used a Makita 10-inch top handle. It uses an 18-volt system with just a single battery that slips in the back here. And then for bigger cutting, I have the M18 rear handle saw that does big cuts all the way up to 16 or even 20 inches in certain cases. One issue that I've always run into is when up in a tree, this saw is super fantastic for using it one-handed, just like it's intended to as a top handle chainsaw. And it's nice and lightweight, it's easily maneuverable, but it really lacks power in certain cuts. It easily gets jammed up in the back here. You see there's a little bit of a gap to eject chips out or leaves or smaller branches. And it gets jammed up, it bogs down the motor, and there's just extra drag on the main motor sprocket inside of here. The M18 slightly improves upon it, even though it does a different job. The opening here is considerably larger, it ejects chips better, it ejects smaller branches easier, and then overall it's just a more powerful or a more torquey motor, and so it powers through some of those situations. So I've added to the arsenal now with the Makita 14-inch top handle saw. This is a 36-volt system, so it takes two batteries, one in each end. So the back of the saw, you see two batteries. It has the easy-to-use battery button to indicate charge level. Of course, still has the lanyard hook on the back, just like the smaller saw does, because it's intended for being up in trees. And one of the things initially, without having used it, that really impresses me is the chip ejection port is considerably larger. And so we'll see as I start to use the saw if this holds true. But right now, the saw appears to have good promise. A couple other features on the 36 volt that are a little bit different and potentially a little bit nicer than the 18 volt Makita chainsaw, talking about these two saws here. The oil fill port is tool free, so this pops open and you can twist it open from there, whereas the 18 volt you can twist it, and I found as the motor pumps oil through the system, it draws a little bit of vacuum on this and you end up having to stick your wrench in here and it easily pries open, but it does require a tool to do that. So we'll see how that plays out as we start to use the saw more frequently. Another feature of the saw, it has two different modes. Single operation mode for regular torque operations, and then if you hold it longer, it gives the extra torque option for some of those harder cuts. And this is what I'm really hoping pays off in this 36 volt saw. Being up in a tree is already fairly difficult to use a saw two-handed, and to have to fight the saw to make the cut just is a little bit of extra annoyance that we don't really want to deal with. The last test we're going to run is a question that I've seen online a couple of times, and it's kind of on the borderline between silly and unsafe, so we're going to test it either way. But here we have the M18 quick lock pole saw. This is intended to go onto the M18 power head, much like you would use for a string trimmer or a hedge trimmer. This snaps onto the end of it, and now you have an extendable pole saw. This normally comes with an 8-inch bar, and a number of people have asked if they can put longer bars on it. So we have a 10-inch bar, we have a 14-inch bar, and we even have the 16-inch bar. And so we'll test and see if the quick lock power head can even turn a 16-inch bar and make a productive cut. So the first question we had was, will it even fit? And as we would expect, all of the saws use an Oregon style bar, so this being the 14-inch Makita does fit the 8-inch normal bar on the quick lock pole saw. So there wasn't any surprise there, but it was a box that some people had questions on, and we checked that box. One quick note here, you saw that I easily pulled this off and on. Normally, as with both the Milwaukee saws, there's a retaining bolt, and you spin the bolt off, the cover comes off, and it exposes the motor drive gear, the chain, and the bar, as well as the tightening screw. One difference here between the Milwaukees and the Makitas, which is pretty noteworthy, The Makita's, this nut is captive, and so when you're out on a job and you have to change out your chain, readjust the bar, or whatever the case is, you never have to worry about losing this bolt. And it's a super nice feature if you're down in the dirt or in the weeds and you're trying to keep track of all these nuts and bolts. So now on to the real question. Does the quick lock power head have enough power to turn a 14-inch bar on a pole saw? And in this case, we're going to use a 6-inch diameter eucalyptus, which is probably right up around the max design capability for this specific saw. So it'll be an interesting test. Having used the quick lock brush roller before and the amount of torque it takes to turn that brush roll, I don't suspect that there would be any sort of problem with this, but we're going to test it and find out. We're going to try all three of these saws head to head. We have a 6-inch diameter piece of eucalyptus outside, and we'll see how they all cut through it. 6-inch eucalyptus is probably right about the limit of this saw, so it should be a fairly good test to compare the two top handle chainsaws, which one bogs and which one doesn't. And of course, 6 inches of eucalyptus for the M18 shouldn't be any sort of issue. Does the M18 quick lock pole saw have enough power to cut through a 6-inch eucalyptus? Absolutely. Will it run a 14-inch bar? Also, definitely will. We saw from those results, the quick lock system has more than enough power to run a chainsaw through a fairly thick branch, even using a longer bar than it was intended to have. As for the other saws we tested, we had a couple surprising results and a couple to be expected results. First, the M18 chainsaw has the most power, it cuts the fastest, and it never bogs down, even when we're pushing this pretty hard. In my opinion, the next surprising result is the 36-volt Makita top handle saw. It's claimed to only have the power of a 35cc gas chainsaw, compared to the M18, which is claimed to have a 50cc equivalent power. We see the Makita cuts through almost as quickly and almost as powerful as the Milwaukee does, and that's probably a testament to the 36-volt system. The next surprising result is the 18-volt Makita saw. Not surprising that this saw performs well or doesn't perform well, but it really shows the difference between these two saws on the 18 and 36-volt platforms. Both top handle saws both from Makita, and the 36 volt is considerably more powerful, as we saw in our test. In running this test, pretty quickly a person could come to the conclusion that this is not a good saw to buy. And that isn't really the conclusion that I drew from the test. This is a very adequate saw. I've used it for years. It's done a lot of jobs very successfully. It's not as powerful as these other two bigger saws. It's also not as expensive. It doesn't use as many batteries. This is a very adequate saw for completing tasks if the person goes into it with the right mindset that we're going to use an 18-volt saw. It's a very lightweight saw. It doesn't contribute to a lot of wrist and forearm fatigue like this saw did. In an effort to underscore how adequate this saw is, not to say that the test showed that this saw was not powerful, we ran a comparison between a couple other saws that a homeowner might have around at their disposal. We have a typical arborist handsaw, and we came over here with the M18 Fuel Sawzall with a pruning blade on it, and we'll show those test results right now. In viewing those test results, it really underscores how much more powerful a chainsaw is than other saws that a person might have at their disposal. Chainsaws are really meant for removing a large amount of material and doing a rough cut through a living tree. And these saws showed this through this test. After having used this saw during the test and also on another tree job, this I think is going to be my new go-to saw for going out to a job when I'm not really quite sure what to expect. The 14-inch bar really gives me a lot of capability and will take down a fairly serious trunk that we might find. And it also is a fairly lightweight saw. It has the one-handed capability associated with the top handle saw, and it really just has a lot of power for any sort of job that we might encounter. This saw, the 18 volt, while not quite as powerful as its bigger 36 volt cousin, this saw will still have a useful place in my arsenal, and it might not go out on as many jobs where a top handle saw is required, favoring the 36 volt. But this saw, I'm still going to keep it around. I'm still going to bring it on jobs. It's not to say that this isn't a good saw. This is a very good saw to use. The final conclusion of this test was that the M18 rear handle saw is the most powerful saw of all the ones that we use in the test, as we would sort of expect. It's a rear handle saw. It uses a 16-inch bar, and it's really meant for taking down small trees. With the results of this test, it's going to be pretty exciting to see what Milwaukee's M18 top handle saw does when it comes out. We expect some pretty good performance out of it, as we typically see with Milwaukee products, and it'll be interesting to see how it toes up head to head with the 18 volt Makita and the 36 volt Makita.